Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for attending our last plenary session of today. This is a fascinating topic. Any of you have been doing any reading on the whole climate issue, have been following the debate around tropical forestry credits, what's the best strategies for dealing with it? And we have an illustrious panel today to address some of those questions. Before I begin the introduction to the panel, I just wanted to remind everybody that right after this plenary session will be the conference reception back in the exhibit hall. So stop on by and have a few drinks, or however many you want. It's my pleasure right now, though, to introduce the moderator for today's session, Liz Sturken, who is the Managing Director of the Environmental Defense Fund. Elizabeth Sturken, my fault. Elizabeth, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thanks, Craig. Appreciate it. You wouldn't like it if I made up a nickname for you either. Hey, everybody. I'm really excited to be here. We have a superstar panel here, and we will get to introductions to of them in just a moment. First, I want to give you a backdrop of why we think it's important to talk about businesses and tropical forests at NACW. I'm with Environmental Defense Fund. I'm managing director at EDF Plus Business, and I helped create with Microsoft the Transform to Net Zero group, and am a part of the Business Alliance to Scale Climate Solutions, which is a growing group of 12 companies now, and EDF and WWF and the UN focused on scaling climate finance. So I need to depart from my talking points for just a moment to tell you a story about what happened last night. It was a rough night last night. I was tucking my 14-year-old daughter in, and she hit me with a wave of climate grief. And she said, "What are you going to do?" And I tried to think about how to explain this, what we're doing here, to a 14-year-old. And I said, I'm going to speak at a conference to try and convince people to stop cutting down forests. And then she hit me with it all. Like, people just sit around and talk. We're not moving fast enough. You're not going to believe this. Is it too much to not want the world to be a burning apocalypse? Seriously, she said that to me. And like, I had to not start crying. I try and tell her that there's still time and we are trying our best. And that's what we're doing here today. And it was just a good reminder of why we are here. We are here no matter where you're from, government, business, startup, journalists, it doesn't matter. We are all here to save the planet. So let's keep that in focus here. We know we face a staggering challenge. We must rethink how we do business, redo our energy systems, and protect critical ecosystems from tipping into extinction while simultaneously supporting communities, those at most at risk for climate change. So business commitments to reach net zero have exploded, as I think you all know. They are increasing at a rapid pace. The thing that has not happened is the action plans to achieve them. That is the challenge. We know we need to cut around 50% of emissions by 2030, which means the next less than 10 years are a critical, decisive decade of action. We also know the science says we cannot reach a stable climate without saving our tropical forest ecosystems. So companies must act fast and dramatically reduce their emissions, and they must also invest in ways to reduce emissions within their supply chains and beyond their own footprint. So they've shown a sustained interest in tropical forest carbon emissions, reductions and removals, and credits to protect and restore forests. They are delivering environmental and social benefits and are claiming as such. But companies faced, let's face it, a complex and dynamic marketplace that makes it hard to know what good looks like when it comes to forest carbon credits. I'd like to turn it over to our speakers to outline the big picture and the on-the-ground realities, and as well as discuss what is being done to advance nature-based solutions and ensure high-integrity forest credits. To introduce our speakers, first, remotely, we have Juan Carlos Himtiach. He is advisor to the climate change and biodiversity area of COICA. COICA, of course, is the coordinator of indigenous organizations of the Amazon River Basin. Hopefully, Juan Carlos is here. We have to my left here, Stephanie Wong, who's Associate Director of the Wildlife Conservation Society. And finally, Frances Seymour, Distinguished Senior Fellow at World Resources Institute. She also serves as Board Chair of the Architecture for REDD+ transactions. Okay, so we'll get to the business piece of this shortly, but first let's ground ourselves in the science. Why are we even talking about forests and tropical forests in particular? Why should we care? Frances, can you help us understand the scale of the problem and why tropical forests?
Okay, well, I'll start with the second one. Why tropical forests? And it's kind of like, why did Willie Sutton rob banks? It's where the money is. The reason we need to focus on tropical forests is it's where the carbon is, and it's where we're hemorrhaging it the fastest. So my colleague Nancy Harris at WRI, her most recent book on sort of global land sector carbon fluxes, estimating that of all the terrestrial biomes, it's tropical forests that have both the largest carbon flux of gross emissions as well as gross removals, and both of those being north of 5 gigatons per year. So this is a very significant part of the whole carbon equation. And then just last week, looks like we have Juan Carlos. Great.
Yay.
Welcome, Juan Carlos. And just earlier this week, we got the IPCC Working Group 3 report, which underlined and pulled together a lot of the recent science on this, and just reinforced, frankly, what we've known for a while, and certainly since the IPCC Special Report on Land and Climate Change, that conserving the remaining natural high carbon stock ecosystems, the tropical forests, the peatlands, and keeping those from being converted to use is the highest priority, no regrets, multiple co-benefits, low cost option, mitigation option that we have. So, and that's not all. As many of you might have seen last week, Deborah Lawrence and some other colleagues published a paper talking about how through non-carbon pathways, in other words, the biophysical ways that forests cool the climate through evapotranspiration, through generating cloud cover and albedo and all those other things, that, adding those up with the biophysical effects, tropical forests keep the planet a whole degree cooler than it would otherwise be. And that's before you even get to the indigenous livelihoods and the biodiversity and the keeping the surface water regulated and all the other things we get for tropical forests. So that's why. But how are we doing on that? My colleagues at Global Forest Watch now have 20 years of satellite data on tree cover loss globally. Clear that it's mostly happening in the tropics, and it has stayed at a pretty persistent rate between 3 and 4 million hectares of primary tropical forest loss every year. And even in 2020, whole global economy contracts because of a global pandemic, tropical deforestation goes up. So we got a problem. We got to do something about it.
Okay, Juan Carlos, what's your perspective on why forests matter? How is deforestation affecting people who live in the forests and who depend on them?
Thank you very much. And thank you for the invitation to EDF and also to participate for spectacular colleagues there.
Can't hear you, so just double check to make sure you're unmuted, and we'll check on the sound volume issue.
Hello?
Got it. We can hear you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your introduction and for the invitation and for this important panel. So according and following to your question, and for us, indigenous people, and forests mean everything. We are connected with the forest as indigenous people from the Amazon basin or different cultures who will live there. We are connected with the land, we are connected with the territories, and also territories means everything for us. Without territories, we are nothing. Without territories, we die. So in that perspective, forest means as the center of life. We are one. Forest, and as a human being, as indigenous people, we are one. We are together. So that is a very real connection with the context with the land and the rainforest that we belong. So this is everything for us. That means our connections with our ancestors, with the memories, families we have for many years, the science recognized how long we are living there in our territories. So in the Amazon basin, at least 3 million, is just very briefly to mention to you, 3 million indigenous people. We are living there, 511 cultures, and with rhetoric, with language, with organizations, small organization communities, and also indigenous groups who are not contacted or who live in free, I say, on the rainforest, like 60 groups, isolated groups. So according to this, that's what is very important to realize what is the real meaning for us, forest and land. It's not just simple concept. This is our life, livelihoods, and we find food, we have water, everything. That's what we protect with our lives. We stand by in the front line. So, of course, we have our threats, we have our problems, we have our emergency. We have a real emergency on the ground. Deforestation and climate change represent enormous threats to our survival, to our people, to all the indigenous cultures in the Amazon basin. Thank you.
Thank you. Stephanie, I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about what's needed to solve this problem.
Sure. So Francis and Juan Carlos have set the stage for why tropical deforestation is such a huge problem that we need to address. And I'll talk a little bit about the finance needs in order to target this problem. So we have seen some progress in terms of recent commitments and pledges for forest finance. So at the COP26, there was over $19 billion pledged to forest finance over through 2025, which is a little less than $3 billion a year. We saw that the voluntary carbon market last year exceeded $1 billion for the first time, and over 60% of the volume traded was in forest and land use credits. And credits with co-benefits reached around $6 a ton. So the question then becomes, how much are these trends going to help in terms of fulfilling the need? And so some modeling done by Bush and Engelman in 2017 found that without further conservation action for forests, we would see around 290 million hectares deforested by 2050, which is I think around almost 180 gigatons of CO2. And at $20 a ton, we could reduce around a quarter of that. And at $50 a ton, we would get to nearly half. But if you're thinking about in just terms of payment for those avoided emissions, we're looking at 800 billion to around 3.5 trillion. And that's not even to address half of the remaining deforestation that still remains. And, you know, the Glasgow Forest Leaders Pledge also adopted at COP26. There are over 130 countries, leaders at the highest political level that committed to halting deforestation by 2030. And a WRI analysis found that if all of those signatory countries were able to stop deforestation, they would save 33 million hectares and avoid around 19 gigatons of CO2. So if you're just using the benchmark that the LEAF Coalition uses, which is $10 a ton for jurisdictional red credits, that's like $190 billion just to 2030. So we're looking at a severe financial need. And this doesn't even include a big piece of the picture of incentives for maintaining intact forests. So intact forests are a massive carbon sink that absorb at least a quarter of humanity's global emissions every year. And without them, the planet would be at least half a degree Celsius warmer than it is today. But there have been no meaningful market incentives for their protection. A lot of that is because carbon markets have been directed at reducing emissions and targeting imminent deforestation against historic reference levels. So basically prioritizing areas that are already experiencing substantial deforestation and actors that can reduce or avoid emissions against those levels. So when we're talking about highly intact forests that are facing current and very real future threats, it's not meaningfully targeted towards protecting those forests. But at the same time, we can't afford to let this massive carbon sequestration function go. And just thinking about the cost of that, if you think about a reasonable range for protecting forests of like $5 to $15 per hectare per year, just thinking about targeting the 1 billion hectares of the most intact remaining forest worldwide, that's $5 to $15 billion a year. That's not doesn't exist now. Like there's no finance targeted towards these intact forests. And it may be dwarfed by the kind of needs for reducing and halting deforestation, but it's still a need that's not being met. And so I guess I'm just bringing up all these slightly scary figures to illustrate that we have a ways to go. But I think, some of the things we'll talk about today, hopefully will get us along the way to doing that.
So the voluntary carbon market is booming. You had the stat that 60% of those credits are land use credits. So what's happening? Why are forests such a big part of the voluntary market? And is that current scale of finance enough to meet the scale of the problem that Francis outlined earlier? I guess the answer is no, given the data that you just showed. But can you say some more about that?
Sure. So, as mentioned, the voluntary carbon market has experienced rapid growth, and we've also seen many new commitments for forest finance. And we think part of the reason why forest carbon credits might be so dominant is that they're relatively cost effective. We can see some large volumes, and particularly if you're thinking about avoided emissions from reduced deforestation. And they carry with them important environmental and social co-benefits. But as we move from this demand limited market to a supply constrained one, I think it's really important that to say that we need to invest in ramping up supply. And if carbon markets are going to make a significant contribution to the Paris Agreement and meeting our 2030 targets, thinking about this 19 gigatons of CO2 that needs to be avoided, we need to really support forest countries to develop jurisdictional systems and build up that scale. And this is also important for supporting these forest countries also to achieve their NDCs. So around 85% of countries indicated that they do intend to use international carbon markets to help achieve their NDCs. And so if you really want to think about the highest possible climate ambition that we need, it cannot be divorced from the high environmental integrity that these credits must carry, especially thinking about whether carbon markets are actually going to make a contribution to global mitigation action.
Okay. So Juan Carlos, what's your perspective on the voluntary carbon market and the challenges for tropical forest credits?
Well, this is very key question. Thank you very much. But I just want to mention in my brothers and sisters, not just from the Amazon Basin globally, we are doing a lot of efforts to follow in the negotiations. We are doing a lot of efforts to participate and follow the according Paris Agreement and other talks and dialogues. So according to that, we are doing also a lot of efforts for indigenous communities and local communities are now positioned to benefit from markets for forest carbon position, because in many cases, I need to mention that our rights are not recognized. So that's what we are very clear about that. I mean, rights on the table. We need to respect and apply and recognize our rights. For example, there are some countries, sadly to mention that I don't want to mention, but there are some countries that, as you know, because you're following and you know us and you know our challenges are that are countries that are not recognized officially indigenous people. Are some countries that are doing efforts to recognize legally collective rights, under the Constitution, and that helps a lot for us to continue following this. So the second point that I was just to mention this is the current models of carbon credits discriminated against those who have been protecting forests for centuries. We are there, we live there. That we also we make a lot of positions and also the scientific lecture they know us and research they know about what I'm saying. So it's important that to understand that baseline of deforestation against which needs to improve. How can this be in fact forests are not valued indigenous people and don't get any benefits? We need to think about that. For hundreds of years, we are maintaining, the science recognize that, maintain it. We live in there in the forest with this biodiversity, with these ecosystems that are these pristine areas still. And even if you want to compare some protect areas legally recognized protected by governments, they are not very well protected at or real protect areas, indigenous areas. Thank you.
Yes. So Francis, same question to you. What are some of the challenges with the voluntary carbon market and tropical forest credits?
Thanks. So I'm going to put you guys on the spot. Raise your hand if you're here for the 10 o'clock session on the quality of forest carbon credits, of carbon credits in general. Okay, so quite a few of you were here for that. I thought it was a really good session, and I can't help but think that this discussion about quality of tropical forest carbon credits is just a microcosm or a case study of a broader issue that's relevant to the whole market. I guess what I would do is just distill my comments into two categories. One are sort of reputational problems for tropical forest carbon credits that have to do with environmental and social integrity, and then market confusion issues that were also on the table this morning. So on the reputational side, while forest carbon credits are very popular in the voluntary market, everybody wants to save the baby orangutans, very attractive, but there are also serious concerns about the integrity of those credits, and some of those are legitimate and some of them less so. I mean, there is sort of a hangover from the CDM era, like, all land sector credits are kind of, crummy. And a lot of people who haven't sort of kept up with the story don't realize that over the last 10 years, we have done a ton to develop ways to manage those risks. Those risks are still real, but we have a better sense of how to manage them. So we've made a lot of progress in REDD+. But some of the concerns are still, quite legitimate. And I think we've read some of the new media exposés, sort of showing that there are problematic projects, and there have been academic papers published, showing these project level crediting baselines sometimes are generating more credits than could really be justified. And I think it was Andrea Tuttle in the meeting this morning kind of called out that we as a community haven't been very good at calling out that there are, low quality credits out there and doing something about it. So I think there's some real concerns. And Juan Carlos has just mentioned some of the social integrity issues where I know there's a sense of disappointment in the indigenous communities that the safeguards frameworks that we've carefully negotiated and put in place haven't always been implemented on the ground. So that's that whole set of issues. The second set, though, is the market confusion. And several of the speakers on this morning's panel talked about, show me what a good quality credit looks like and why, I'm getting conflicting messages about should I purchase emission reduction credits or only do removals count? And some, corporate buyers have gotten the idea that, only removals are good. And, the reduced deforestation credits, not so much. There is this issue of high forest, low deforestation credits that Stephanie will say more about. But there are some people who think they're fungible and some people who think they aren't. And the issue that Juan Carlos just mentioned is like, well, if we don't find a way to reward success in protecting forests, we're not rewarding the indigenous peoples who've been successfully protecting forests all this time. So that's an issue. And last but not least, and I'll say a little bit more about this later, is this issue of project scale crediting versus jurisdictional scale crediting. And, we've got this weird bifurcated system where almost all of the finance from the voluntary carbon market flows to projects, whereas all of the jurisdictional scale reward for performance has come from public sector money through like donor agencies. And, there are issues with both, but as we're about to see some of the first jurisdictional scale credits becoming available for the voluntary market, there's some confusion. Well, how do we think about those things and how do we fit them together? So those are some of the challenges.
Okay. That's helpful context on how significant tropical forests are in the voluntary carbon market. And of course, how much more finance is needed to meet the scale of the problem. So what do we need to do to address the challenges? That's what I'd like to dive into next. As we heard in plenary this morning, not all credits are created equal. Let's discuss carbon credit quality and how we ensure that tropical forest credits drive a real impact for the climate and for people and for biodiversity. So Francis, what are the key elements that make a high quality tropical forest credit?
Well, starting, tropical forest carbon credits have to meet all of the standards for environmental and social integrity that we apply across the board. So I don't think we need to take time talking about, all of those different elements. I think where we need to focus is where there may be some special considerations or some special issues, the confusion that I just alluded to. And so I think I'll take my couple of minutes and talk about why many of us have come to the conclusion that we need a shift to jurisdictional scale crediting. And to the extent that we have project scale crediting for tropical forest credits, those credits need to be fully nested in the accounting systems and programmatic strategies of jurisdictions. The negotiations over REDD+ under the UNFCCC did come down on national level accounting, national level strategies, national level safeguard systems under the Warsaw framework. There's a reason for that. UNFCCC doesn't regulate the voluntary carbon market, but there are reasons that those things should be aligned. And for me, it really boils down to two things. First is environmental integrity. I think not just in tropical forests, but elsewhere, scale matters. And the greater the scale you're implementing something, the more you can manage your risks of leakage. There are some impermanence issues that arguably are better managed at a larger scale. The additionality problems I alluded to on project scale baselines, that we can help solve that by nesting those baselines within jurisdictional scale accounting. So there are a lot of environmental integrity issues. But for me, really the more important one is the effectiveness argument. I've been working on this tropical forest problem for the last 3 decades, and as the numbers show, I'm failing terribly. We haven't made a dent, in decades in doing this. And I just think that while project scale interventions are great, there's tons of good projects out there that are saving biodiversity, that baby orangutan, that they are, providing livelihoods to local people. They are keeping carbon out of the atmosphere. But what they're not able to do is do what only governments can do at jurisdictional scale, and that is enforce the law. That is regulate extractive activities. That is recognize indigenous peoples' rights. That is arrange fiscal systems so that they reward forest protection rather than subsidize forest clearance. And I am all ears if somebody has a theory of change for how isolated standalone projects in the landscape can aggregate up to that kind of solution to broad scale forest loss. I want to hear it. But I've been asking for it for a couple of years now, and nobody's really told a convincing story. So I sort of feel like we don't really have an alternative, but to incentivize governments to do what only governments can do, and find a way to incentivize good, high-quality project-level investments that nest within those broader jurisdictional systems.
That was very clear and compelling. Thank you. Juan Carlos, what do COICA's member organizations view as necessary elements for high-quality tropical forest credits?
I need to mention that we have some efforts also to respecting our principles. So we have indigenous principles, protocols of consultation, and that is why we know ourselves that we have rights, and then we are right holders, and we say that we need to lead in designing interventions and negotiations of beneficiary. In that context, we need to understand what kind of consultation are you going to apply. I mean, you need to understood because we have a multi-role, diverse languages and cultures and visions, and we need to interpret that. We ask patient for that. So sometimes there are people are looking as passive beneficiaries, but we need effective and full participation from the beginning of any process. Consultation, what it really means for us, they need to be understanding to the other side, and then we need to sit down and go ahead for any kind of projects. Also, we need to have a clear understanding what it really means benefits, and then who is going to apply these benefits, ourselves, governments, intermediaries, etc., etc. So also we need to reward forest protection, which indigenous people have been practicing for so long now, not just reduce deforestation. No? Recognize and also initiatives or traditional knowledge how we are contributing and practicing and these processes, and governments needs to identify, recognize, and we are part of this. We can contribute. So high forest, low deforestation approach is, from our point of view, a valid mechanism to take into account the conservation work which is done in the indigenous territories. So this is something that we need to connect. HOICA is working very hard with our members, respecting our protocols inside consultation. So that's what I can mention at this point. Thank you.
So Stephanie, how has WCSs Experience working on REDD+ over the last 15 plus years shaped your views on what it is quality in tropical forest credits?
Okay, so we've always approached REDD+ as a promising climate finance tool for the conservation and protection of high conservation value and threatened forests. And the reason why we got involved in REDD, especially at the project level, is because of our long-term presence in these landscapes, and long-term partnerships also with local governments and local communities. And so I think over the years, so now we manage the largest land sector project in Cambodia, and we were also pretty instrumental in helping to develop the first government-owned REDD project in Africa. And at this point, I think we know what it takes to develop and implement and also secure financing for high-quality projects. But as Francis clearly stated, we need to demonstrate that move on to larger areas of forests at the scale that is actually needed to maximize the potential of REDD+, especially to meet these very difficult to achieve 2030 global climate targets that we have. And so, thinking about that, though, there's also a temporal quality dimension to this idea of high quality. I think that's something that we as groups have tried to wrestle with in terms of if we're thinking about the development and of the supply over time, especially over the next to 2030, we want to prioritize emission reductions because of the vast investments that are clearly needed to halt deforestation. So maximizing investments in emission reductions and deprioritize removals to the extent that that deforestation and degradation are still increasing, but we expect that this balance can change over time as those are on the decline. And also, Juan Carlos mentioned the importance of HFLD credits. I think that that's an important pathway that is new and exciting in terms of being able to finally give governments Indigenous peoples, local communities, other stakeholders who have been involved in maintaining the precious resources of intact forests, access to global carbon markets, and not thinking about investment now to prevent international leakage and to the level that is not required in the future, where vast investment is going to be needed to bring these countries and jurisdictions off of these development trajectories where these entrenched deforestation drivers are already present. And so I think, and the other thing that I think we really need to get right is nesting. So it's thinking about the fact that projects are now, there's confidence in projects to the extent that, investors have fully bought into timelines and with payback over decades, and there's confidence in the development in the project cycle, and bringing that to the development of jurisdictional systems, where currently it's sort of like, if you get it verified, we'll pay for it. So it's making sure that the early movers and the lessons that we've learned as early movers are not lost as we try to scale up.
Yep. Yeah, so that brings us to our final and most important segment, which is, what can we all do? So to ensure the environmental and social integrity of carbon credits, growing corporate demand must discriminate among credits, both currently and prospectively on the market. This discrimination can help improve the volume and the quality of the credits. And last year, EDF was a part of a process with 8 other environmental groups, or I guess we were one of the 8 environmental groups, lost track here, and Indigenous groups, and we began working together to identify high quality and define high quality credits from tropical forest protection. The groups up here were all involved, and as well as several others. These organizations brought their diverse perspectives together on this issue and to develop a set of guidelines for businesses on what constitutes high quality tropical forest carbon credits, with an aim to ensure that we move the market towards credits with high social and environmental integrity. So we released a draft of that guidance at COP26 and have just wrapped up consultation about that. We're excited that the final guidance for business will be out and officially released in mid-May. So Francis or Stephanie, can you say a little bit more about why these groups got together and about this process?
Sure, I can start. So do you want to list, should I list the group?
Sure, you can. I don't know that. Yeah.
Okay, so this group, high quality tropical forest carbon credits, which is a handful to say. And I'm going to list a bunch of acronyms now. So it's Wildlife Conservation Society, World Resources Institute, the Nature Conservancy, EDF, of course, World Wildlife Fund, COICA, and EPOM, which stands for the Amazon Environmental Research Institute, and facilitated by Meridian. I think there was a recognition that there is a urgent and growing demand for guidance on what is high quality in terms of a tropical forest carbon credit, but that also incorporates what we see as like a common vision for what needs to be done in order to maximize the potential of REDD+ and to align and help meet the goals of the Paris Agreement. And so these groups started wrestling with the idea of like, what are the topics that need to be addressed in terms of focusing on the actual supply side. And this included not just, well, what are the aspects of environmental integrity and social integrity, but also what is the trajectory and timeline that we want to see for that? And what are the types of units that we think need to be included in a company's forest carbon portfolio? And that includes emission reductions, it front-loaded in the near term, HFLD credits, thinking about the different stages of where a government could be in terms of developing its system, because all governments are different. They all face different challenges. And so there are just a lot of issues to wrestle with. So that was a process that we went through. And I can just say so the draft consensus statement is out, and we're finalizing the guidance for, I believe, May, right? And that will be released. But we've also committed to a phase 2 of work that will do a deeper dive into several of these more challenging issues that I think we really need to be resolved to unleash demand and incentivize supply. So that's this HFLD issue, the idea of reductions and removals and how to grapple with those, especially in their role in companies beyond supply chain strategies, and standards in terms of what are some of the weaknesses currently in standards, and how could they be improved to reflect greater higher integrity, and what are some of the due diligence elements that could be included for corporates, but also that standards should be adopting over time, and then jurisdictional programs, and identifying, maybe what is a quality jurisdictional program as well, and what are some of the important milestones for nesting, to make sure that, again, these early movers can be brought into these developing bigger systems.
Frances, is there anything you want to highlight from the guidance?
Sure. I think Stephanie's right. It's important to understand the scope of our efforts, because we wanted to contextualize this in the broader set of issues that were treated in the panel this morning. All of these ICVCM and VCMI and all these other initiatives going along. We sort of at the outset say, look, to the extent that companies are considering purchasing credits, it needs to be in conjunction with an SBTI or equivalent commitment, decarbonization, all that stuff. But we're going to zero in on, when you are purchasing tropical forest carbon credits, how do you discriminate in the market? How do you not only choose well, but use your influence to accelerate the transitions that we believe need to happen? So what I'll try to do is distill that guidance for corporate purchasers that Stephanie has already alluded to. So thing number one is, in your current purchasing decisions, but especially in your willingness to make future purchase agreements and commitments to purchase credits when they come online, preference to jurisdictional scale credits for all the reasons I talked about. And when you are buying project scale credits, ask about progress towards nesting within jurisdictional scale programs. And we have this little table in the guidance about, well, if there's jurisdictional scale credits available, what do you do if they're coming soon? If they're not available in the near future, but maybe in the medium term, what do you look for in project scale credits? And if there's no hope of a jurisdictional scale program in the near future, what do you do? So that, we're trying to be realistic that this is a transition. Different jurisdictions are going to go along at a different pace. So it's basically using that market power to send a signal to drive the supply. Second, as Stephanie has already suggested, think about a portfolio approach to your purchases. Talked about all these different kinds of credits, right? And so we're talking about a transition from project scale to jurisdictional scale, but also a shifting composition between, like, the emissions reductions, which are urgent now. We really have to save the forests we still have, and then gradually can move more into the restoration agenda. So Stephanie actually came up with this lovely graphic that kind of shows the transition over time. So it's an evolving portfolio kind of approach. Third is to become aware of the weaknesses in current crediting standards, or even if not weaknesses, unknowns, as we're testing new methodologies. And to the extent that the buyer has the capacity to conduct supplemental due diligence, do it. And we heard from Alexia Kelly on the panel this morning about what she's done at Netflix to actually look into specific projects. And do that additional due diligence. And I think, Juan Carlos would talk about, look particularly for how, the degree to which the crediting has taken Indigenous peoples into account, not just as passive beneficiaries or vulnerable groups, but actual co-designers of the initiative and level playing field negotiators for a fair share of the benefits. But then last but not least, be an advocate to tighten up the whole system, both individual crediting standards and the whole system of the carbon market, so that companies don't have to do their own due diligence and they can just rely on the stamp of approval that they've really met these standards of environmental and social integrity. So as Stephanie said, we've sort of called for some bold things that companies should do, but we haven't really filled in all the details about exactly how to do it. So that's what phase 2 is gonna, and that's the main message that we heard during the consultation phase. It's like, great, these are great suggestions, but how do we do it? And I should, by the way, take a moment to thank the individuals in this room who actually submitted comments, and we really appreciated all those, and we've taken them to heart in formulating our phase 2 agenda for the next few months.
Good. So Juan Carlos, how should Indigenous territories participate in the process for jurisdictional credits? What's your take on that? And then also just a little more about how COICA consults with its members.
Well, as you know, COICA very quickly, this is most of the important indigenous organizations in the Amazon basin. What my elders who are not here right now, they have this vision to get in unity together. This is, COICA has 38 years for creation, almost 40 years for creation. So important organization, international organization for us. It's a challenge. It's a challenge, real challenge. Imagine our own languages, or cultures, or visions, or structures, or governments, international language, German, French, Spanish, English. But for us, we do a lot of effort to continue it and going to trying to learn on this process ourselves and apply governance and apply respect or protocols and so each other. For many years, we are following these issues or other issues about forests, and we are adapting in the constantly this work from the ground, from the visions, from the contribution from the brothers and sisters. They are working on the ground. So, and then we bring this to the international arena, in the context for climate change or the CVD or international arena, in the context of human rights, right? Because sometimes it's difficult, it's lack. We are not can't communicate. Sometimes difficult to lack. So some governments, you know, how is the situation. So many of you know the reality. For many years, we weren't doing this, but this is challenge. But we are doing very well so far. Our working group in COICA has been participating. We did our consultation. We talked to the leaders, to the board, to the 9 countries. We have. That's why sometimes why you don't do this? Why you don't answer? COICA, you need to answer very fast. But we need patience. We ask patience. We talk. So sometimes it's hard to understand. But we have our own processes, our own dynamics on the ground and the forest. Sometimes we talk long days, long nights. You know, so but we get together. Unity is important. So that's why we are part in a year, almost 1 year, in this working group. Respectively, we are participating, and we are active in making contribution and recommendations for high quality standards on behalf of Indigenous people rights, local community. Has been a part of the official presentations. The first version we did together as this document was presented in the webinar during the COP26 in Glasgow. So we have workshops in the Amazon basin members countries. So we are 9 countries. We were doing in some countries. And this is amazing because we connect, we update our agenda, and we see our threats daily. Or they are claiming for help or different pressure that we are looking that is disappearing. The criminalizations against the mother and the nature. So it's happening daily, you know, that Stefan and they're mentioned. So informing about these processes, our talks and the inputs in this group we feel that they understood, the group understood, and we had this participation and contribute. That is something that we want to continue working together. So now the idea is to visit other regions networks in the Central America, in Congo Basin, and Indonesia, what is in this line of forests and tropical forests. So we want to share our experience, what we are doing with this group, also how we are working with our rights in this standard. And this is also, we feel for my organization that this group will be important to be working together. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'll try and recap a little bit of what we covered today, which was a lot. First, starting with Juan Carlos, without the forests, we die. We all do. So just to start off with my dramatic story of my daughter, Anna, and end with that, like just the urgency and critical nature of this is something that this is the point, this is front and center. We need to act now with urgency to protect tropical forests. We are not doing it at the scale at which we need to. The importance of emissions reductions forest credits now in the near term. And high quality carbon credits can drive real climate impact, biodiversity impact, impact for people on the ground, but it is currently difficult to quantify what is high quality in the marketplace. Several initiatives are looking at the growing voluntary carbon market and trying to ensure the integrity, including tropical forest credits. Of course, companies need to reduce their emissions in line with what science says they need to, but they are also, and this is my appeal to companies in the room and elsewhere out there, companies are key to unlocking the finance needed, and through high quality carbon credits, that has the potential to scale up tropical forest protection while supporting the rights of Indigenous peoples and local communities. We expect to issue the guidance for businesses on high quality tropical forest credits in the coming few weeks. And I want to end by thanking this amazing panel, Francis, Stephanie, and Juan Carlos. Thank you so much for this great conversation. If you have more questions, if anybody has questions, let me know, follow up afterwards. And thank you. You have to end early.
Thank you.
You've laid that out in incredibly stark, clear terms, both the environmental imperative, the challenge that's immediately facing us, and the humanity aspect of it, not only for the global community, but for the Indigenous peoples who are facing their livelihoods at stake. Yeah. Again, thank you very much. Let's give them another round of applause. Juan Carlos, we'd like to invite you to join us for a drink, but that's not going to happen. Maybe another time. Everyone is invited to the exhibit.
I am waiting for you in the rainforest. I'm waiting for you in the Indigenous territories.
Good.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Sounds good. Keep the lights on.